Percaya nggak percaya, di umur aku 26 tahun ini, aku baru serius nge-scrub. Dan produk yang aku pilih adalah Dove, karena ini udah brand terkenal juga. Banyak artis-artis yang pakai, so why not kita pakai ini aja langsung. Katanya ini tuh bisa bantu melembabkan, mencerahkan, dan juga ngangkat kulit mati kita. Dari baunya juga wangi, teksturnya itu ada bulirnya, jadi setelah digosok, kulit terasa lembut. Ini aku lagi coba di satu sisi tangan dan kaki, dan ini hasilnya sebelah kanan yang udah dipakein scrub, rasanya lebih lembut, tampilannya juga lebih cerah dan bersih. Ini bagian tangan aku yang belum di scrub, sebelah kanan ini yang udah bersih dan cerah. Kita langsung coba lagi ya. Gosok sampai kulit matinya terangkat, tapi jangan terlalu kasar juga ya. Fix, ini terbukti sih. Coba ya di kaki lagi yang satunya. Gosok. Guys, sekarang aku mulai ngerti sih bedanya. Simpelnya, kulit kita itu ketutup sama kulit mati. Makanya butuh scrub untuk buang lapisan itu. Jadi setelah scrub ini, kulit pasti lebih
Hi
cerah.
everyone, I'm Jo, and today I'm joined by Charmaine Yuan, the APAC originalist from Human Made Machine. Before we jump in, for those who might be new to our Ad of the Month series, so here's a quick rundown of how it works. So every month we select a few ads from different brands within the same category for a specific market. We then put them to the test to see if they drive a lift across key brand metrics, while also asking the audience what they actually think about those ads. And in June, we set our sights on Indonesia, specifically looking at the skincare category on TikTok. And we wanted to explore how the different formats like the creator-led, the brand-owned, and the hybrid actually perform with real audiences. And out of the 12 or 15 ads that we tested, a creator ad for Dove actually came up as the winner. And today we're going to dive into the data and unpack what made the approach effective. So thank you so much for joining me today, Charm.
Thanks for having me, Joe. This was a really fun piece to work on because I got to look at so many different styles of TikTok content. And Indonesia is really one of those markets where the creative landscape genuinely keeps you on your toes. So I'm really excited to unpack what we found.
Yeah, I'm glad you feel that way because whenever I go to Indonesia and whenever I look at the platform, there is always something new going on, and like it evolves very quickly. And I know that brands are investing heavily in influencer marketing, so really curious how to see this creator-led content actually performs better than the traditional brand ads. So excited that we got to study this. So the first question of the day, from your perspective, what's your impression of the social media landscape in Indonesia, and why did you think this was an interesting market to explore?
So Indonesia actually has one of the highest number of TikTok users in the world, just behind the US. And we see that the trends there move at lightning speed. So what's viral this week might be old news by the next week. And, the sheer variety of content is remarkable because of the scale that it has in that market as well. And what makes it particularly interesting is the culture that fuels the popularity on the platform as well. So tell me if you agree, but I think Indonesia is a deeply communal society, and that maps onto why TikTok works so well in that market. And I love this play on TikTok made me buy it. So Indonesians also have a local slang for irresistible product recommendations on TikTok called Racun TikTok, which roughly translates to TikTok poison. And I think that's so telling, right? Because it shows you this isn't a market of passive viewers just scrolling by. People are in the comments, they're sharing their finds with their friends, they're riffing on the trends as well. So it's really active participation in these communities. And then on top of that, there's commerce as well. So online shopping, we know it's massive in Indonesia, and TikTok has really leaned into that with the homegrown commerce platform Tokopedia and TikTok Shop operating as a combined ecosystem. So you have this really rare environment where entertainment, community, and commerce, they all kind of come together in one platform. So for a study comparing creator-led versus brand-owned content, there's really no better testing ground than Indonesia.
Yeah. So when you were analyzing the results, was there anything that genuinely surprised you or stood out? Were the findings in line with what you expected going on?
Yeah, that's a great one. So there was one finding that stood out, and that was how well actually the Dove branded content ad performed on TikTok. So going in, my hypothesis from looking at the ad was that it's a very polished brand produced ad, and it would generally do better on higher attention platforms. So think something like YouTube non-skippable format or TV, where people are more likely to sit with the brand-led ad. And since, TikTok, we know, is a very short attention, thumb scrolling environment, you expect more native kind of creator style content to dominate. But that's not what we saw. So the branded ad, that was the Dove spot, it actually drove really strong purchase consideration just behind the winning Dove creator-led ad. And when we dug into why, it came out to the visuals and the simplicity. So the visuals were polished but fresh, and every frame of it actually worked to reinforce what audiences already knew about Dove and about the strong brand identity that it has as well. So instead of fighting the platform, I think the familiarity and the high production quality actually helped it to cut through very strongly. So sometimes I think we should not be too quick to write off polished brand content on TikTok. If the execution is strong and the branding does its job, it can absolutely earn its place in the feed as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's very interesting. And also kind of tying back to what you said earlier about, the e-commerce landscape is very strong. When we go to the TikTok on Indonesia, right? Even with a branded content, then there is always a link to immediately link you to the market, so then you can immediately buy that. So that's actually helpful. When you actually already like the content and then you just press purchase, then there you go. Your package is on the way actually.
Yeah, so fast, right, these days.
So one thing I found interesting was that across all the 3 ads that came up as the winner, or more the top 3 ads that come as a winner, the common thread was not really about the format, but it was the clear focused messaging. And do you think this suggests that clarity has become a stronger driver of consideration than authenticity or production style, especially on fast-moving platforms like TikTok?
That's a great question. And I actually like to push back slightly on that. So I don't think clarity has overtaken authenticity or production style as a driver. I think of clarity as the foundation or the hygiene factor that every creative needs to do before you even get to the creative direction. Because at the end of the day, no matter how authentic your creator is, how beautiful your ad looks, if the message doesn't land, the whole thing just falls flat. So you can't build consideration on confusion.
Yeah.
So I think of it as 2 layers. The foundational layer is clarity and branding. Does the audience know what you're selling and who you are? And then the second layer is authenticity. So being true both to your audience and to what the brand stands for as well. And what we saw in the winning Dove ad is that it had that combination. So it set up the product benefits with clarity, and then it delivered an authentic demonstration of efficacy. So real before and after proof, which works very well. And Human Made Machine actually also tracks behavioral data within our simulated media environments. So we could see that actually both of the key benefits mentioned by the creator landed within the median time in view of 11 seconds, which is essentially the attention window for this piece of content on TikTok. So it managed to deliver it just in time. And so again, to reinforce, that's clarity as the foundation, and then the authentic creator demonstration as the layer on top.
Okay, that's a really great strategy and good point, because sometimes what we see most of the time is that an ad or a creative approach tends to lean into one thing but not the other. But we need to kind of have the right balance between clarity as well as authenticity. So this brings me to the next question though. So based on these results, what are some of the most common mistakes brands make when working with creators? Are there things they tend to overcomplicate or overlook?
Well, this is not something that we saw from this particular study, but from all our conversations with different clients and different brands. So one of the biggest mismatches we see is brands leaning too heavily into the niche appeal of a talent or a creator. So a talent might be really brilliant between their specific community, but their use cases they talk about, their sense of humor, the topics, those don't always translate to a broader audience. And it's really easy to assume that the creator's audience fit means the audience fit at scale, but that's often not true. So that's something that we saw. And then the second watch out is prioritizing a creator's personal narrative at the expense of the brand.
Yeah.
So again, we talk about clarity, right? And clarity of branding. So we see with so many creator ads, where the first 10, 15 seconds, they're all about the creator's story, setting up the drama, setting up the tension. And the brand doesn't really show up until much later. So the challenge is by the time the brand finally appears, the audience attention has essentially dropped off completely. And on TikTok, that kind of pacing just really costs you. So something to watch out for is definitely not taking too much time with that setup and context.
Thank you for sharing that. We also saw on the article that we wrote that, like the creator-led and the brand-owned content are really competing with each other, which is also in line with what you shared earlier, and they seem to play different roles within a campaign. So if you are to advise brands on creative testing, would you evaluate these formats against different success criteria rather than expecting every ad to perform equally well across the same KPI?
Yes, absolutely. That would be my advice. And it's really one of the most important takeaways from the study. So how we view it is that these formats aren't rivals. They're just doing different jobs at persuading the consumer. So imagine if you measure them against one universal scorecard and expect every single ad to top every measure, you'll draw the wrong conclusions. So our approach really is to keep the same core metrics, KPIs that are essentially tied to the brand growth, but flex on which ones we prioritize based on each ad's job. And then you can really see this in the results. So the creator-led Dove ad really won on consideration. It was very relatable, very focused. It showed exactly how the product worked. And the brand film, it came in close, but its strength was different, right? So it had a more premium, aspirational feel. And in fact, it earned one of the highest breakthrough scores when we benchmark it against historical ads that we've tested in Indonesia as well. So what we saw here is that the creators can really help to earn trust in the product with authenticity, and then the brands set the voice and the perception that creators can then build on. So on top of measuring brand lift against the campaign goal, we also test each format differently because each one is doing a different job. So for example, a branded functional ad is making a claim on efficacy and benefits. So we focus more on the claim, right? And then can it cut through? Does the product matter to the audience? And then do they believe in it? And then on the flip side, if it was a brand purpose ad, it works differently. So the job is more emotional. So we look at, did it move people? Did it change how they feel about the brand? It can score lower on consideration for this case, but it should still be doing that job to shift longer term brand perceptions. And then finally, creator content. It lives in the feed, so attention is very scarce. So that's where we get really granular. So we track the attention second by second. Where exactly do people drop off? We look at cut through. We look at whether the creator is actually a fit for the brand, because audiences also pick up on that mismatch quite easily as well. So in conclusion, my advice is before you test, be clear about the job each asset is meant to do, then hold it to that criteria for the job. So we start shifting our mindset from thinking about, which format is going to win, and we move towards, is each ad actually doing its job well? And we found that actually leads to much better decisions.
Those are such great pointers. Thank you so much. So if I can sum up briefly, don't expect every ad to be good at everything because they all have totally different jobs, but instead get clear on the goal of the ad first and judge it on how well it does that specific job. So thank you so much for sharing your insight today, Sharm. We hope you enjoy unpacking these insights with us today. If you want to check out the full analysis on Dove and the other brands that we tested, you can find it all at humanmademachine.com. Thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you in the next discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, let me stop this. Hold on.